Welcome to the debate. The ethics of influence. Where does persuasion become manipulation? Today, we analyze the ideas from the book, The Invisible Chains. I'm your host, representing the perspective that in a world of subtle coercion, we need a rigorous defense against the unseen mechanics of control.
And I'm the counterpoint. I'll be looking at this material with a skeptical eye, asking whether the cure proposed here, this, fortress of rigid boundaries, might actually be worse than the disease, potentially turning all human friction into a pathology.
Relationships, isn't it? We are analyzing a premise that suggests control. It rarely starts with a bang or a bruise. It starts with a whisper. The material we're discussing today, it acts as a manual on autonomy, arguing that we need to unmask the playbook of manipulative relationships to reclaim our ethical selves. But the real challenge, and why we're here, is that the line between influencing your partner and controlling them is it's terrifyingly thin.
Thin is an understatement. It's microscopic. And that's my immediate hesitation with the core thesis here. I mean, when you hand someone a guidebook on unmasking manipulation, you risk creating a paranoid reader. Suddenly, a husband asking his wife to change her outfit isn't just an annoyance, it becomes an attempt to erode identity. We need to ask right up front, by adopting this mindset, are we arming people with necessary shields, or are we just handing out hammers and telling them to treat everyone they love like a nail?
Well, I think that minimizes the reality of the people this philosophy is designed for. We live in a subjective, emotional world. If you feel crazy, and I tell you you're not, who's right? Without objective standards, we are vulnerable. The concept we're debating is the spectrum of control. It argues that manipulation isn't a switch, it's a dial. It moves from subtle persuasion all the way to systematic domination. My position is that because the early stages, the gaslighting, the gradual erosion of self, are invisible to the naked eye, we need a systematic framework. We need to name the unseen to fight it. The idea of an ethical compass based on intent, informed consent, and mutual respect isn't just high-minded theory. It's a survival tool.
I don't deny that genuine malignant abuse exists. And yes, those people absolutely need a survival tool. But my concern is the spectrum itself. This framework lists subtle persuasion as the entry point to this dark path. It defines this as gentle nudges or appeals to shared values. I mean, if we label that as step one toward tyranny, aren't we condemning basic social interaction? If I try to convince my friend to see a movie they're on the fence about by appealing to our shared love of sci-fi, am I now eroding their autonomy? The hypervigilance required to spot every single red flag described here just seems exhausting. It risks creating a worldview where every silence is a tactic and every compliment is a trap.
See, you're looking at the tool and blaming it for how it might be misused, rather than what it's built for. The inclusion of subtle persuasion isn't to say all persuasion is bad. It's to illustrate the progression. The argument is that the chains bind us before we even recognize their presence. The frog doesn't jump out of the boiling water because the temperature rises so slowly. This methodology is just a thermometer. But let's stop speaking in abstracts. We need to look at the mechanics because that is where the rubber meets the road.
Let's do that, because the material lays out what it calls the manipulator's playbook. This is really the meat of the argument.
Exactly. And this is where my argument is strongest. We aren't just talking about bad vibes here. We are analyzing specific, observable tactics. Gaslighting, love bombing, triangulation. These are not accidental miscommunications. They are described as deliberate strategies to erode reality.
Okay, break those down for us, because gaslighting is a term that gets thrown around on social media until it almost means nothing.
The definition we are working with today really restores the weight of the word. Gaslighting is defined here as the systematic denial of events that occurred. That never happened, you're imagining things, you're just being sensitive. It's an assault on the victim's cognitive faculties. It forces the victim to outsource their reality testing to the abuser. And then you have love bombing. This isn't just someone being romantic. The concept defines it as
an overwhelming deluge of affection and future faking, designed to create an addictive bond, specifically a dopamine spike, right before the devaluation starts. If you don't have these precise definitions, you just interpret this behavior as passion, and that misinterpretation is exactly what the manipulator relies on.
Okay, I'm with you on gaslighting. If I say I didn't do X when I clearly did, that's malice. But let's look at the gray areas in this playbook. Take guilt tripping and the silent treatment. The text defines the silent treatment as a punitive withdrawal of attention. But in the real world, is silence always a tactic?
Well, the argument depends entirely on the function of the silence.
But we can't see function. We can only see behavior. Sometimes silence is just silence. Sometimes a partner is overwhelmed, flooded with cortisol, and literally cannot speak. If I use this framework, I'm instructed to view that silence as a deliberate refusal to communicate designed to force compliance. That's a dangerous leap. And we also have to talk about projection, attributing one's own flaws to another. Could it be that the person rigidly applying this framework is projecting their own insecurity? If I interpret every withdrawal as a tactic to make me feel small, I become impossible to be in a relationship with. I stop asking, are they tired? And I start asking, how are they trying to control me?
I think you are overlooking the cumulative nature of the evidence, though. The playbook isn't a bingo card where one square equals a villain. It's about patterns. The methodology urges us to look for the erosion of self-trust. That is the metric. If the silent treatment is leaving you as described, desperate for connection and willing to concede just to restore peace, that is not someone needing space. That is a power dynamic. That is intermittent reinforcement, giving love, then snatching it away to keep the victim off balance. This framework gives us the language to say, this silence is hurting me, rather than I must be annoying. It shifts the blame from the victim's inadequacy to the dynamic itself.
Intermittent reinforcement is a powerful concept. I'll grant you that. It explains the addiction component, why people stay. But let's pivot to the solution. Because if we accept that this dynamic is happening, the proposal for dealing with it is, well, it's ethically complicated. We need to talk about starving the cycle, specifically using the gray rock method.
Which is, in my opinion, the most practical tool in this entire discussion.
Describe it for the listeners because it sounds geological.
It's metaphorical, but highly effective. So the theory argues that a manipulator feeds on emotional supply. They want a reaction, anger, tears, defense, even an apology. Any reaction is fuel. The gray rock method is the practice of becoming uninteresting. You offer no reflection, no drama. You answer with, okay, maybe, I see. You become, essentially, a gray rock. The analogy used is that of a child throwing a tantrum. The behavior withers when it's denied fuel. For someone trapped in a co-parenting situation with a toxic ex or a family dynamic they can't fully escape, this is a lifeline. It lets them disengage without blowing up the bridge.
But is gray rock not a form of manipulation itself? You are deliberately suppressing your true self, hiding your authentic reactions to manage another person's behavior. That is, by definition, controlling the interaction through deception. You are pretending to be boring to manipulate them into leaving you alone.
It's not deception, it's camouflage. And it's not manipulation, it's protection. There is a massive ethical difference between hiding your money so a thief can't steal it and hiding the truth so you can steal someone else's money. The intent is entirely different.
But consider the cost. This method is essentially emotional detachment. Can a person truly detach their emotions from a parent or a spouse without becoming cold or unfeeling in other areas of life? The suggestion is to cultivate an inner sanctuary no external force can breach. That sounds lovely, but in practice, it means walling yourself off. If you spend your days strategic non-responding to your mother, you aren't building a relationship, you're managing a threat. It creates a profound isolation. You become a gray rock to everyone. Eventually, you risk forgetting how to be a person.
I see the risk you're pointing at, but I would argue that the isolation is already there. The manipulation has already destroyed the connection. You are grieving a relationship that doesn't actually exist. Gray rock is simply acknowledging that reality so you can stop begging for a different one. And we have to distinguish this from general indifference. The framework calls this discerning empathy. You can understand the other person's dysfunction. You can have empathy for why they are the way they are without drinking the poison. The alternative, continuing to engage emotionally with someone who uses emotional coercion, is what leads to the physiological toll discussed: chronic stress, fatigue, the echoes within. Gray rock preserves the energy you need to be warm and authentic with the people who actually treat you with respect.
That brings us to the most difficult and I think controversial part of the material, the concept of the unseen architect. This is where the mirror turns around and looks at the victim.
And it is the most transformative part of the analysis. It's where the power shifts.
Or where the victim blaming starts. The argument suggests that the victim is often part of the pattern. It lists traits like high empathy, conflict aversion, and need for approval, not just as virtues, but as vulnerabilities that we must own. My challenge here is that this sounds dangerously close to saying you were abused because you were too nice. It implies that if you were manipulated, you built the chains yourself. It puts the responsibility of the crime on the person who was robbed.
I strongly disagree with that interpretation. The explicit claim is, this is not about victim blaming, but about a radical act of self-awareness. This is about radical agency. If we refuse to look at our own vulnerability activation, we are doomed to repeat the cycle with the next partner and the next boss.
But look at the language. Unseen architect. It implies design. It implies the victim is the foreman of their own prison.
It implies we provided the materials, yes. Look, if I have a need for approval, I am susceptible to love bombing because I am starving for that validation. If I have conflict aversion, I am susceptible to the silent treatment because I will do anything to restore peace. Recognizing this isn't blaming the victim for the abuse. It's empowering the victim to change the only thing they can control, their own response. The argument is that recognizing your own adaptive behaviors like fawning or people-pleasing is the only way to reclaim the ethical self. If we don't acknowledge our role, we remain permanent victims waiting for the manipulator to change. And we know they won't.
That's a compelling argument for the long term. But have you considered the burden this places on someone who is already beaten down? They are already doubting their reality, thanks to the gaslighting, and now we tell them, hey, look at your conflict aversion. That's why this is happening. It requires a level of psychological fortitude that a victim might not have yet. It demands they analyze their inherited coping mechanisms while they are actively under siege.
Which is why the methodology puts building your fortress and setting boundaries before this deep internal work. You stop the bleeding first. You can't analyze your childhood while you're being stabbed.
Right. Let's talk about that fortress. This is the structural defense proposed. We are talking about strict boundary setting: physical, emotional, time, financial. The mantra is, boundaries are not for them. They are for you.
Precisely. And the key concept here, the one that I think every listener needs to memorize, is the JADE acronym. Do not justify, argue, defend, or explain.
Right. The advice is to state the boundary without apology or over-explanation.
Because when you explain your boundary to a manipulator, you aren't building understanding. You're giving them ammunition. You're giving them arguments to dismantle. If you say, I can't lend you money because I'm saving for a car, they will argue that you don't need the car yet. If you just say, I'm not lending you money, end of sentence, the boundary holds. The fortress is about defining your sacred space.
But again, I question the realism of this fortress metaphor in a nuanced life. In the real world, relationships, even healthy ones, require compromise. A fortress implies war. It implies a siege mentality. If I treat every interaction as a potential breach of my intellectual boundaries, do I isolate myself? If my wife asks why I'm doing something and I refuse to jade, I refuse to justify or explain because I'm building my fortress, I'm not being ethical. I'm being a dictator. I am shutting down communication.
But you're conflating a healthy dynamic with the toxic ones we are analyzing. Context is everything. In a healthy relationship, explanation builds intimacy. I'm not doing this because XYZ invites your partner into your world. In the context of manipulative dynamics, explanation is blood in the water. The distinction is made regarding ethical standoffs. Knowing when to disengage is a profound ethical decision. The fortress isn't about being a dictator, it's about reclaiming your inner voice. If you have lost the ability to say no without guilt, you have lost your autonomy. The fortress restores that. It's not a permanent state, it's a rehabilitation facility for your will.
I suppose my hesitation comes down to the binary nature of it. The framework seems to separate the world into ethical interactions and manipulative interactions. But most of life is in the gray. The white lie, which we often navigate, is a classic example. We try to distinguish between a white lie for protection versus deception. But who's the judge?
The ethical compass is the judge. We go back to intent, consent, respect. If I lie to save my own skin or to control your perception of me, that's manipulation. If I withhold a harsh truth to spare your feelings while respecting your autonomy, that's influence. It's nuanced, yes, but this gives us the coordinates to navigate that gray area. Without it, we are lost at sea.
I just worry that, for some, this vocabulary will become a weapon. "You're gaslighting me" is a very popular phrase these days, often used simply when someone disagrees with us. "You're crossing my boundaries" is used to shut down valid criticism.
That is a risk with any knowledge. A scalpel can save a life or slit a throat. It depends on the hands holding it. But the alternative is ignorance. The alternative is staying bound by chains we cannot see. The strength of these ideas lies in naming the unseen. When we speak of the echoes within, the self-doubt, the fatigue, the walking on eggshells, that resonates because people are feeling it. This philosophy validates that experience. It tells them, you are not the problem.
It validates it, yes, but does it heal it, or does it calcify it into a permanent defensive posture? That's really the question.
Okay, let's wrap this up. We've covered the mechanics, the defenses, the gray rock, and the internal architecture. Where do you land on these strategies?
To summarize my position, the analysis of manipulation in the invisible chains is sharp, painfully sharp. It identifies the poison accurately, but the cure feels clinically cold. I'm concerned that applying these rigid templates, gray rock, strict fortresses, constantly scanning for subtle persuasion, to average relationship struggles could destroy connection rather than save it. It's a hazmat suit. You need it for toxic waste, but if you wear it to a dinner party, you're the problem. My final verdict is to proceed with caution. Use the diagnostics, but be very careful with the treatment. Don't let the defense against control become a cage of its own.
And I see it differently. I believe the coldness you perceive is actually clarity. The source material provides a necessary vocabulary for things we feel but can't name. For someone drowning in confusion, gray rock isn't a cage, it's a raft. My final verdict is that this is a must-try methodology for anyone feeling that subtle unease we discussed at the start. The concept of discerning empathy, where we protect our own well-being as an ethical duty, is a transformative shift from being a victim to being empowered. It's not about walling off the world, it's about building a gate that only you have a key to.
There is one thing we definitely agree on, though: the emphasis on rebuilding self-trust.
Absolutely. Whether you buy the whole framework or not, the idea that we must listen to our inner voice and trust our own perception of reality it's the most critical takeaway.
Agreed. If you don't trust yourself, you have no compass at all. You're just navigating by someone else's map.
That brings us to the end of today's debate. We hope this discussion helps you evaluate your own relationships through the ethical compass.
Keep questioning and keep listening to that inner voice.
Thank you for joining us on the debate.